Hi and welcome. I am Jamie. This is this week's Sunday sit down video, and this week I'm going to be talking about a topic. It's kind of part two of a topic that I started discussing 2 weeks ago, which was a response to a shut up and sit down convention video from an author named Scott Westerfield, who was talking about victory points in games, and his theory was that victory points suck, that victory points deter from the narrative and the story of games, and he prefers designers to approach games without victory points. So I love victory points, and so I did a video about my top 10 or 10 games I love that have victory points and why those victory points are important to the experience of those games. So today I decided to look at the other side of the coin and look at games that I love that don't have victory points. And so I put together a list. I will be telling you that list today, and at the end of the video, if you want to stick around for the end, I will share kind of two hybrid methods that I think work or that could appeal to people who enjoy games with victory points and people who don't enjoy games with victory points, or if you're a designer and you're looking for a hybrid approach to appeal to both those types of people. I have some ideas. So basically, this list is in no particular order. I'm going to look at 10 different categories of games that don't use victory points and feature one of my favorite games in those categories. I'll start out with cooperative games. Very few cooperative games use victory points. This list could just all be cooperative games, but I didn't want to do that because that would be the entire list. It would just be a list of my top 10 favorite cooperative games. So instead, I'll just say cooperative games. A lot of cooperative games have, they're moving you towards a singular event that you're trying to achieve, a singular threshold of something. And along the way, you also have opportunities to lose the game. One of my favorite cooperative games is Time Stories, and Time Stories does not use victory points. You have a specific mission that you're trying to accomplish, and you're running back in time to accomplish that mission. And if you do, you win. And if you don't, you lose. But generally in Time Stories, you continue doing runs until you succeed. It's pretty rare, at least in my experience, that you truly fail the game. There are a lot of cooperative games where you do truly fail. Like Forbidden Desert is one of my favorite, more abstract cooperative games. In Forbidden Desert, you are trying to collect a bunch of treasures or find out where they are and then collect them and get back to a helipad and race off into the distance away from the desert. And if you do that, you win. And if you don't do that in time and certain things happen, you lose the game. So I think cooperative games are a great example of games that use win-loss conditions collectively to avoid the use of victory points. Another category of games are one versus many games. These are usually in one versus many games, both sides, the one and the many, have their own different victory conditions they're trying to achieve, and they're typically not victory points. This also fits into the category of team games like Captain Sonar. But my favorite example in this category of one versus many is one that I talked about many times, Scotland Yard. In Scotland Yard, there is Mr. X or Mrs. X who is unknown. Their location is unknown to the other players. They are running around Scotland Yard, giving a little bit of information about how they're traveling through London. And the other players are detectives who are also moving around Scotland Yard trying to find Mr. or Mrs. X. And if they find Mr. or Mrs. X, they win. The detectives win. And if Mr. X eludes the detectives for long enough, they win. No points necessary. It's just a win-loss condition for either side. I think that works well with these team games. And that segues into my third category, which is head-to-head games. So in lots of head-to-head games, there are win-loss conditions that either vary based on which team you're on, or they vary based on your faction or your character. But typically, they have the same win-loss condition. Like in Magic the Gathering, you're trying to reduce your opponent's health to 0, which is actually kind of akin to victory points. So I didn't want to use that as my number one example. I've talked about Hanamikoji enough on this channel, so I didn't want to mention Hanamikoji again. Instead, I thought I'd mention an older game. This is my original childhood copy of Stratego. In Stratego, the one and only thing you're trying to do is find your opponent's flag and tap on it with your little piece and capture the flag. That's it. And the entire game of Stratego is built around protecting that flag, bluffing your opponent so they don't know where to find your flag, and taking down your opponent's pieces so they can't even get to the flag. Because you can protect your flag with bombs, and if you kill the opponent's 8s, then they can't even defuse the bombs to get to the flag. But the flag could also be out in the middle of nowhere. You decide where you want the flag to go. So this is a great example, I think, of a game that I really enjoy, a head-to-head game where there are no victory points. You're just trying to accomplish a singular mission, and you both had that same mission. Another category of games that that I didn't even expect to be on this list, but there are some games that I really enjoy this category, which are last man standing games. So these are essentially player elimination games where if you are the last man standing, you win. No points necessary. If you are alone, you win. Some games in this category are Red Dragon Inn, which I just played for the first time yesterday, Coup, and I would say probably my favorite in this category is Skull. And Skull is a bluffing game where you are trying to either... And actually, now that I'm saying it, Skull does actually kind of have a victory points condition. If you get 2 points in Skull, you win the game. But one of the main ways to win the game in Skull is if none of the other players are there anymore, if you've eliminated all the other players. So I might, as I'm saying this, I realize that I probably should have put it in a different category, but it still fits into that player elimination category. And I think that these are all good examples of games that can actually work with player elimination. A friend, Jeff, mentioned to me yesterday that he often uses Red Dragon Inn as a way to start a game night. And as players are eliminated, those players who are eliminated go off to the side and just play a different game. So it works well as an opener, and it defines that cutoff point of who's going to play the second game of the night and who's going to keep on playing in the first group. So that's last man standing game, player elimination games, where the entire mission of the game is to be the last person standing. The next category are games where you have one or more win conditions, and they are also the end game conditions of the game. So if you control X territories, you win the game, and you end the game, and you win the game. A classic example of this is Civilization, which I finally played for the first time recently. Civilization has several victory conditions. If you have enough certain amount of money, if you conquer someone else's capital, if you have a technology victory, and I think there's a culture victory too, but I might be confusing that with money. I think there are 4 different victory conditions. And if you accomplish any of them, you just instantly win the game. Game of Thrones is another example of this. I think there might only be one condition in Game of Thrones. It's been a while since I played that one. But the example that I wanted to use, I guess my favorite game in this category, is probably Inis. I've only played Inis once, but I really enjoyed it because of the drafting element in particular. But Inis has 3 different victory conditions, and if you accomplish any of them, all the other players are alerted to you having accomplished that goal, and then they have, I think, 1 round to take that goal away from you. So if the goal, I can't remember the exact goal, but if it's like control 3 territories, you announce, hey, I've controlled it. I have this victory condition. I will win the game very soon if no one takes it away. Everyone else has 1 round to try to take one of those territories from you so you no longer accomplish that victory condition. That's Inis, I-N-I-S, in case you haven't heard of that game. The next category are games where each faction in the game, each player, each character, has a completely different win condition. Some examples of this are Rex. In Rex, every faction has a very different win condition, and when they accomplish it, the game ends and they win. Vast has, every character in Vast has their own win condition. And then I think my favorite example, while this is technically a head-to-head game, you can play it with more players, and I think it works really well thematically with each player having different win conditions, is Star Wars Rebellion. In Star Wars Rebellion, one player or players play the Empire, the others play the Rebellion, and each side has very different win conditions. The Rebellion, the Resistance, they are trying to, again, it's been a while since I played this. Well, I know the Empire is trying to discover the Rebellion's home base. And if they discover it and, I believe, conquer it, then they win. So the Rebellion has hidden their home base somewhere on the map. The Empire has to find it. That's a really nice tension there in the game. They're trying to stay hidden as the Empire tries to find you, and yet protect your home base, so that when the Empire does find you, you can protect it and maybe even move to another home base. And then the Resistance, I think they're mostly just trying to outlast the Empire. I think there's another win condition that I'm forgetting. But they have these asymmetric endgame conditions that they're both pushing towards and both interact with each other in interesting ways. Same in Rex, same in Vast. This is probably one of the most challenging types of games to design. I really respect designers that pull this off. They're also sometimes challenging to play, especially when you have 6 different win conditions at the table that you're trying to keep track of and mitigate and manage. It can be pretty difficult, but it's impressive when a designer pulls it off. Let's jump to race games. Games where you are racing to the end of the game, and the first player to reach the end of the race simply wins. The example that I almost used for this, but it ended up making it into my my victory points video, was Downforce. I love Downforce. Downforce is a racing game, and you are trying to finish first in Downforce, but there actually are points at the end of the Downforce, so that racing to the end of the game isn't the only condition. But there are some racing games that I do enjoy that have accomplishing the race, finishing the race first as their win condition. And those 2 that I wanted to mention were Dorado and Can't Stop. Can't Stop and Dorado, the quest for Dorado. I think there's another Dorado game, maybe on Kickstarter right now, actually. But Can't Stop, I think, is my favorite in this category. And Can't Stop, you're rolling some dice. You are really pushing your luck in Can't Stop and trying to get 3 of your tokens to the top of the track. I've only played on the app version. It's a great app version if you're looking for an app game or an app port of a board game. But there's this really nice tension in Can't Stop of, do I keep rolling my dice and pushing my luck and ruining all of my progress this turn, or do I just try to push towards the end? And one of the great things about a game like Can't Stop, in terms of the racing element and the lack of victory points in it, is that on every turn of the game, you have the chance of winning the game. If you could push your luck and push and push and push, and I think on pretty much any turn, you could technically win the game. And so even if you fall behind, you always feel like you have a chance of pushing to the front and just winning, which I think is really cool. So those are racing games. The next category are social deduction games, like Resistance, Avalon, and one of my favorites, A Fake Artist Goes to New York. In A Fake Artist, you are one player is the fake artist. The other players are all playing the artist, and they have to draw a drawing that all of them know what they're drawing. They're all trying to draw an elephant, say, and they're drawing pieces of an elephant, or things that are trying to clue each other into saying, "Hey, I know that it's an elephant. I know that I'm drawing an elephant." Meanwhile, one of the players, the fake artist, is also drawing parts of that picture to try to convince the other players that they know that they are also drawing an elephant, even though they're not. And at the end of the game, you just simply point at all the players and you say, "Okay, I think you're the fake artist. I think you are the fake." Well, that's all you're pointing to. You're just trying to identify the fake artist. And if you do identify the fake artist, and they are still able to identify the picture, then they win. So there are some really interesting win conditions here that don't involve points. And I think that works really, really well for the tension in social deduction, bluffing type games. I have 2 more categories, and then I'll get to my hybrid methods that I'd recommend, or that I think are worth considering. One category, this is kind of a weird category, which is games that have a point-like threshold, like a victory point-like threshold to end the game, but it isn't a game about collecting victory points, really. I'll explain. It's a weird category. And the games that I have in this category are, 2 that I don't have with me right now are Risk Legacy, which was one of my favorite legacy experiences and gaming experiences ever. In Risk Legacy, you are typically ending the game by collecting 4 stars. And it's been a while since I played again, but there are various ways that you can actually collect those stars. But unlike in Risk, you're not trying, or like traditional Risk, you're not trying to just eliminate all of your opponents, which can take a long time. In Risk Legacy, you're just trying to collect 4 stars, and if you do that, and the way you do that are thematic things, like winning big battles or opening stuff. And if you do that, you win the game. The other example of this is Kemet. In Kemet, you are collecting victory points by doing it by winning attacks or by holding certain territories at the end of the round, but you're not really accounting for these points at the end of the game. It's just if you have at any given time, I think it's 7 or 8 points at the end of the round, you win the game. And the other example that I give that kind of fits into this nebulous category is Blokus. Blokus is one of my favorite abstract games. And in Blokus, you are basically just trying to place all of your pieces on the board. As the board gets increasingly crowded, it becomes increasingly difficult to do that. And at the end of the game, you look at the number of squares that you have. Here, I'll show you a piece for Blokus. So if I have this piece, remaining at the end of the game. This has 3 squares in it, and so I have 3 points. And you're trying to have the fewest points at the end of the game for Blokus. So again, I'm using the term points, but really you were just trying to get rid of all of your pieces. That's the goal in Blokus. That's the story you're trying to tell. So even in abstract games, there can be stories and narrative. Oh, I didn't even show you a fake artist. This is fake artist right here. I missed that. So the last category are deduction games. I mentioned social deduction games earlier, but these are more pure deduction games. And one of the classic examples is Codenames, but the one that I wanted to mention today is Cryptid. In Cryptid, you have this big map with it that has a variable setup, depending on what the game tells you to do. The game tells you very specifically how to set up the board, but there are many different board setups. And you have a little bit of information about where the cryptid is, where this monster is hiding on the board. It's a competitive game, mind you. And all of the players are asking each other questions to kind of eliminate types of land masses where the monster could be. Like I might have a clue, my one clue might say that the monster is on a water or mountain territory. And you might have a clue that says the monster is 2 spaces away from a tower. And so by asking questions to other players, we are deducting each player is deducting where that monster might be. And ultimately, to win the game, you need to make a correct guess. The monster is only in one place on the board. The game is very carefully calibrated to determine where the monster is with each setup of the board. And there's only one place that the monster could be based on the clues available. And so the winner of the game is the winner who correctly guesses the one location that is correct for the cryptid's location. So again, no victory points. Just you're all building towards this goal of correctly guessing where the cryptid is located. Those are the 10 categories, 10 examples from those categories. And now I wanted to mention 2 hybrid categories that I think can work really well. And I messed up a little bit earlier because Skull does fit into one of these hybrid categories, which is games that have that involve victory points, that have multiple win conditions, and one of those win conditions are victory points. Skull is an example of that. The real classic example of this, I think, is Seven Wonders Duel, though. In Seven Wonders Duel, the game can end after all 3 rounds, and if it does, you count up victory points and there is a winner. However, you can win Seven Wonders Duel with either a military victory. There's a military track that you're kind of pushing back and forth on. You're trying to push the opponent towards a military loss where you win. And there's a science victory where if you collect a certain number of science icons, you simply win the game. So having those alternate win conditions paired with victory points gives the game wonderful tension during the game because you have this tension with research or with science and military. But you also have a sense of satisfaction at the end of the game because you've accumulated all this stuff and you've built your little empire and you get to count up points for it if you get that far. So I think that hybrid method of having multiple win conditions and almost using victory points as a backup. If players don't win with these instant win conditions, victory points are there so that the game doesn't last forever and so that you have a way of accounting for the value of all the things that you've done during the game. The other hybrid category are games that use that have a race condition so you're racing towards a certain condition to end the game, but that condition is different than the end game victory condition. Scythe, my game, is an example of this. In Scythe, you are racing to be the first player to place 6 stars on the board, with those 6 stars each having a different thematic and mechanical meaning. But the winner of the game isn't the player to place their 6th star. The winner of the game is the person who has the most money, which is effectively points at the end of the game. Karuba is another race. In Karuba, you are racing to have your 4 explorers reach the end of the jungle. They're trying to get to temples in the jungle. And so you're trying to race to do that, but that's only the end game trigger. At the end of the game, you still need to count up your gold that you've collected along the way, your points and gold and treasures, and that determines the winner of the game. The other example of this is Jamaica. In Jamaica is a race game where you're racing around a track. You're trying to be the first person to complete a circuit of the track, or maybe more than one circuit. But the first player to win that race isn't the winner. Rather, you get gold based on your relative position when that endgame condition is triggered, and you're rewarded if you are the first player to finish, but you still are recognized if by getting gold if you aren't the first player to finish, and you get gold for other things that you've collected during the game too. So I think this is another really nice hybrid method where you have a thematic race, a memorable race to be the first player to do something, and where that race has meaning at the end of the game, where you actually still collect victory points to determine the winner. I think these are two great hybrid methods, at least for consideration. They don't work for every game, and really many of the examples that I've given today, they work because the game was designed around this method, because the designer determined, okay, this is the best way, this is the way to give the players the best experience of this game, and that's what I'm going for. I did have one example of why racing isn't always best, because in the talk about why victory points suck, Scott talked about the idea that having a race to something, like the first to kill a giant monster, the first to get to Mars, how that ends up being more memorable and just, in his opinion, strictly better than victory points. But here's an example of why I don't think that's necessarily true, and I'll use this broader category of using a race to end the game, but not necessarily to determine the winner, would be the game of soccer, or football, as you in Europe call it. In soccer, imagine a game of soccer where the winner of the game is the first team to score. Imagine that being the case in any sport, where instead of collecting points during the game for scoring goals or baskets or touchdowns, if all of those games were just the first team to score wins the game, that would take so much drama out of the game. It would be tense, sure, but the game could last 5 minutes. You lose so much control as a designer and even as players if it's a pure race to the finish. So I want to throw out soccer as kind of a clear example of why it might actually be better to have the win condition separated from the end game condition. Those are my thoughts on games that don't use victory points, but are still largely successful in what they do, and that I can have a lot of fun with these games, even though they don't have victory points, like many of the games that I love, and some hybrid methods. I'd love to hear your thoughts on other games that use these hybrid methods, or other games that you love that don't use victory points, where you are simply moving towards a singular event or goal that is both the end game condition and the win condition. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for joining me again for another Sunday Sit Down, and I will see you on Tuesday with a My Favorite Game Mechanism video. Thanks.